Bokeh Game Studio was founded in August 2020 and properly announced its first title at the Game Awards 2021, Slitterhead. The development team has enjoyed plenty of fandom since its inception, if solely because of the pedigree backing the studio. Keiichiro Toyama, best known as the creator of Silent Hill, Siren, and Gravity Rush, founded the studio after his departure from Sony Japan Studio, along with his colleagues Kazunobu Sato and Junya Okuda. There is no secret recipe for success when it comes to establishing a studio and a new IP, but that's exactly what Bokeh Game Studio has done. For Game Rant Advance, we spoke with Bokeh Game Studio CEO Keiichiro Toyama, producer Kazunobu Sato, game director Junya Okuda, and audio director and composer Akira Yamaoka about Bokeh Game Studio as an entity, as well as the entities that stalk players in Slitterhead. Indeed, the horror comes through in every bit of gameplay shown, but it's not meant to be a game that simply scares players. It's a refreshing type of horror, one designed to match the faster pace expected of action-adventure games. It's set in Kowloon, a city designed after Kowloon and Hong Kong, where players take on the role of a Hyoki, an entity with no physical form or memory. Instead, the Hyoki is capable of possessing various NPCs around Kowloon to do battle against Slitterheads, disgusting monsters that disguise themselves as humans. Not much has been revealed beyond that about Slitterhead's story, but when asked what the central theme was, Toyama explained that it's about establishing one's identity and the influences from others throughout that process, as well as the resulting fluctuations and uncertainties. Given that Slitterhead's possession mechanic is at the core of the story and the Hyoki is inherently void, the premise seems like a perfect match for this theme. More importantly, this establishment of identity is what's at the heart of Bokeh Game Studio as well. The challenges of creating a studio and launching new game IPs have never been higher. While some gamers justifiably complain about sequels, remakes, and some licensed products, there's plenty of new IPs out there that tend to get overlooked. If someone wants something unique and innovative to play, it's out there, sometimes being overshadowed by the AAA machine. But Bokeh Game Studio has a unique advantage compared to some other studios: its talent. When asked what the goal of Bokeh Game Studio was, Sato said, "We don't actually have a clear goal. Our aim is to continue working on games that everyone feels motivated and enjoyable, and I believe that is crucial for Bokeh Game Studio." Sato also explained that the team knew what they were doing would be very difficult, to establish the company, to break through the noise, but through its focus on talent and the strength of Slitterhead as an IP, the studio has managed to do that since day one. The body horror appeal and unique premise of Slitterhead, alongside the pedigree of the studio, has seen the game do everything a new IP needs to do. But it wasn't without help. Sato was sure to say thanks for the support of many people, both inside and outside of the studio, and called Slitterhead the culmination of everyone's efforts. Sato also added that Bokeh Game Studio's Slitterhead launch day plans include having some drinks and talking about games, as always, highlighting a very typical day for anyone who loves the industry. But then, it's back to work. As Sato explained, the first thing the studio will account for is the reaction to Slitterhead. Based on that, the team will consider adjustments while also keeping an eye out for new interesting ideas across all kinds of platforms. What won't change for Bokeh Game Studio is its talent-driven approach to game development, with Sato adding, "One thing that won't change is our commitment to creating games that can showcase the talents who worked on Slitterhead. We appreciate everyone's support and attention. Slitterhead is simply the first showcase of that talent, but it is not simply an action-adventure game. Nor is it simply a horror game." Slitterhead could be described as an action-adventure game with a horror setting, but that downplays the horror. It could be described as a horror game with action-adventure elements, but that downplays the action. Slitterhead is somewhere in the middle, pushing both to the fore while taking in inspiration from everything. For Game Rant Advance, Toyama talked a lot about the challenges encountered in the game, but also the spark that led to each and every innovation. The main idea behind Slitterhead was to reconstruct Toyama's previous work on Siren. For the uninitiated, Siren is a 2003 survival horror stealth game directed and co-written by Toyama. It involved a cast of characters with interconnected storylines trying to survive against a Shiboto outbreak in the town of Hanuda across different time periods. To accomplish this, there is a mechanic called sightjacking that lets players see from the Shiboto's perspective. Overall, Siren garnered plenty of positive reviews, but there was a constant critique of it: its gameplay. In many ways, Slitterhead takes on the challenges of sightjacking and aims to make it fun, which Siren 2 also tried to do. Siren 2 made a lot of improvements to how sightjacking worked, but as can happen with sequels, it was not as beloved as the original. Speaking to how Siren's sightjacking mechanics influenced Slitterhead, Toyama explained that, adding to borrowing one sight in Siren, there was a system in Siren 2 where you could also have control of another's actions. This branched out into completely being able to use anybody. Siren is closely related to the core concept of Slitterhead, but it's not the only prior work to inspire this game. Toyama also explained how Bokeh Game Studio drew from Gravity Rush for its level design and the experience of having numerous interactive NPCs, a necessity for Slitterhead's possession mechanic to work. While the original Siren was about possessing enemies, Slitterhead is about possessing friendly NPCs to combat enemies. NPCs are always important in terms of making a game world feel lived in, but that goes double for Slitterhead. Not only does this mean Slitterhead devs had to be careful when balancing the processing load caused by NPCs, but they also needed to have importance in terms of level design. Where they are, what they're capable of, how players could use them or break them, and much more are all important considerations. These NPCs can even die, but players can live by abandoning their body, leaving them to their fate. Some NPCs are more compatible with this progression and are known as rarities in Slitterhead, with Toyama explaining, "The basic premise is that they are simply a compatible individual. However, as players progress through the story, I hope they will discover and understand this relationship more deeply." It remains to be seen what makes these rarities so compatible with a Hyoki, but all NPCs also needed to feel very natural. In fact, it seems developers even had a few favorites. Toyama recalled a few funny behind-the-scenes moments where level designers added perhaps a few too many of the same character to a mission. Each of our level designers had a certain degree of creative freedom with structuring the missions. There were times when more than one person ended up having a favorite civilian character placed in the mission, leading to moments of, "It's this character again?" Both the Hyoki and Slitterheads are unique concepts for the upcoming title. The Hyoki are bodiless entities capable of possessing humans, and Slitterheads are form-changing monsters that feed on human brains. Slitterheads are inspired by the Chinese mythology of Yaguzi, which are typically portrayed as brain-eating monsters with a long tongue. It's a little on the nose in that regard, but Slitterhead takes that core concept a little further. Toyama felt zombies were a bit overdone, which is why he sought out new ideas. That's how he landed on the Yaguzi, and knowing that they consume the brain, he also thought the next logical step was these creatures stealing memories and traits. In turn, that led to the creatures disguising themselves as humans. In his own words, "As I believed enemies that devour flesh such as zombies have been replicated quite a few times, I sought new ideas and arrived at monsters that consume the brain. I thought that if they consume brains, they might also be able to steal memories and traits, which led me to develop them into creatures that can disguise themselves as humans." The similarities between the protagonist Hyoki and the monstrous Slitterheads are interesting. The latter are these bodily creatures that devour brains, steal memories, and can look human, while the Hyoki is a bodiless creature that can take over bodies and bond with humans. There is some crossover in the lethality of these abilities as well, but as Toyama explained, the concept of a Hyoki being without form and memory has been consistent from the very beginning. As with all things, it took several revisions and reflections to get to its current state, but fans will just have to wait and see how the Hyoki and Slitterheads are connected, if at all exactly. When asked about this connection, all Toyama would say is, "They're definitely similar in the aspect of possessing others' bodies. However, since this relates closely to the story's development, I hope players will discover it for themselves during the gameplay." A game can live or die by its setting, and that is especially true for a game with horror elements. A mixture of the walled city of Kowloon and Hong Kong, Kowloon is a densely packed city perfect for tighter atmospheres, epic chases, and plenty of action. Just as the Hioki and Slitterheads parallel one another, so too does Kowloon in its inspirations and in its depictions. There is that futuristic aspect that a city, especially like those set in the 90s, evokes, but there is also an opposing grit and grunge. That Toyama also sees in the coexistence between tradition and modernity. Speaking to how Hong Kong and Wong Kar-wai's work influenced Slitterhead, Toyama said, "I was deeply impressed by the vivid color sense, the noisy textures, and the coexistence of tradition and modernity. Similarly, Slitterhead is set in the 90s because of this coexistence, because of this blend emphasized by transformations of that time. This means putting a lot of emphasis on its sound design to express the reality of its setting alongside the creatures players face." Speaking on Slitterhead's environmental sound design, Yamaoka said, "I placed great importance on the distinction between real and reality. While advancements in hardware have brought visual and sound representation closer to the real, I believe that alone is not enough. Games are entertainment and exist in fictional worlds, so it's essential to express not just realism but also evoke emotions, warmth, and a sense of expansiveness that conveys reality. In particular, for ambient and drone sounds, I avoided using standard assets and instead created unique, organic, and varied sounds to represent the world of Slitterhead. I truly hope players enjoy that sound experience." Through these blends and parallels, Slitterhead has the potential to be a very original game. That is something Toyama and Bokeh Game Studio as a whole want to deliver to players. That's also why it's taking the risk of producing a brand new IP with a unique take on horror and action. The safer bet would be to make a more traditional survival horror game, but the safest bets don't always get the most out of talent. As Toyama explained, from the very first Silent Hill, we have maintained a commitment to freshness and originality, even if it means being a bit rough around the edges. That attitude has remained consistent throughout my works and in Slitterhead. On the action side, Slitterhead features typical hack-and-slash mechanics. The battles change, however, based on Hioki's possession, where players can utilize the host's blood to create weapons to fight the Slitterheads. Players can swap hosts on the fly, so based on other NPCs that are around, there can be a lot of body swapping when engaging and/or battling enemies. Rarities will take this even further, with action bleeding into the gameplay just like a Hioki fits into a human body. Players are able to use these NPCs to quickly move throughout the city, also resulting in speedy chase sequences, stealth infiltrations, captivity escapes, and more. Bokeh Game Studio promises a diverse range of gameplay experiences through its emphasis on action. On the horror side, Toyama describes it as a reminiscence of Japanese adult comics for its blend of action elements and supernatural abilities with horror, survival, and suspense. A result of this is minimized straightforward scare tactics, suggesting the game does not rely on simple jump scares to realize its horror. Instead, blending an anxiety and horror-focused story with action-focused gameplay is what's on the table. If anything, Toyama hopes this approach also attracts fans who might be hesitant about playing a horror game and would encourage them to give it a try. Slitterhead is set to release on November 8th, putting the development team on the back-end stretch of its work. Its release will be the result of 4 years of pushing talent and taking risks, and for fans of horror and action, that pedigree is incredibly promising. And that's all for this Game Rant Advance. I'm Bilal with Game Rant, and we'll see you next time.